All right, guys. Welcome to the Mac Forum Sunday video chat, uh, July 27th. Hopefully you will enjoy the evening. Don't have a whole lot on the agenda. We'll try to cover a couple of things that I noticed in the Mac world this week, and hopefully you'll have some interesting information come your way. Probably the biggest news in the Apple world this week was the fact that public beta was released for Yosemite OS X 10.10. So a couple of our forum members have gotten a hold of it and run it a little bit. I know we're seeing some reports of people having some problems initially getting in to do the download. A few people had some problems. There was apparently a large number of people trying to get into the download. I managed to get in the same day it was released. I've been running it since then. If I lose you tonight, it means either one of two things. Either I lost an internet connection, or I accidentally kicked the plug out of the external drive that I've got Yosemite set up on. I know a lot of people are kind of interested in Yosemite. I want to say, let me give you an idea. I won't go into a whole lot about how things are working right now because I really haven't run it enough to really give you an in-depth look at it. But one thing I want to be sure to mention to you, this is about betas in general. A lot of people are trying to get into beta. They may or may not have gotten their redemption code. I saw the notice on the forum roughly a half an hour before I got my redemption code from Apple. Did the download, did the installation, and what I'm about to say has nothing to do with the Yosemite beta specifically. It's beta in general. I've got another piece of betaware that I'm testing at the moment, and I've tested one or two other things, and I have to say, a lot of developers are using closed betas. That is, you have to be invited, and they offer some kind of perk for being a beta tester. In other words, it's either a discount off of the final release, or maybe you get a free copy of the final release, something like that. I've done, this is the first Apple public beta that I've done, but I've done a couple of other closed betas for a couple different programs. And I want to, before some of you try really, really hard to get into various betas, a couple things that you probably need to consider. For starters, whether you have the newest machine or the oldest machine, it's not going to be a huge issue in the beta. When a developer says, I want to support everything from Snow Leopard up, for example, they're going to need to test it on both older and newer machines. So the age of the machine is a minor issue if you have the minimum requirements for a piece of software. But there's a different problem to be addressed with betaware, and that is betaware, no matter who makes it, whether it comes from Apple or it comes from somebody like this, no matter who it comes from, these folks, when you do betaware, there's always the possibility of some instability. No matter how many times you test a piece of software, how many different systems a developer may test it on, they can't possibly test the entirety of systems that they're going to have in a beta. Let's just, as a conservative number, say that you have 1,000 people in the beta. That's going to mean that you're going to have different systems, different configurations of hardware and software. So maybe there's going to be a problem there that you didn't know about, as a developer. So unless you are the kind of user that doesn't mind uh, the fact that your Mac may crash out once in a while, or program may crash, or some other issue may come up. Betaware may not be the best thing for you to test. I'm not saying that the Yosemite beta is unstable or anything like that. This has nothing to do with that specific beta. It has to do with the nature of betaware in general. The other thing is that some other people probably are not good candidates, and that is if you're looking at a situation where your Mac is mission critical for you. Okay, in other words, things that you have to do, and you use your Mac to do it, then you've got two choices. Either don't participate in the beta, or create a situation where you can back up, should you need to. In my case, what I did is to put the Yosemite beta on an external hard drive. And I already had a Maverick clone on that drive, and then I installed Yosemite right over the top of that. So I'm not even running off of my primary hard drive at the moment. If something were to go wrong, I can reboot into my main drive and be functioning back where I am. I'll be starting work again in a couple of days, so I'll need my system to function well. So if I'm in a situation where I'm running the beta and something crashes, I can reboot and be back into a stable environment in a short amount of time, literally in the time that it takes to reboot. One of the things that you're also going to have to look at with a beta is the possibility that software may or may not work. So far, I haven't run into too many things that don't work, but that's always a possibility. So that's the other reason for having a backup, a way to remove yourself. What if a piece of software that's critical to your operation doesn't work under the beta? Then you got to have a way around it. Okay, that's the way it works. And if you're not comfortable troubleshooting issues and spotting things like that, don't tackle a beta. That's pretty standard for just about anything, whether it's an Apple beta, a third-party developer, whatever. There's always going to be the possibility something will go wrong. You need to have, for lack of a better word, an escape plan, something that gets you back to normal. And that's all we'll say about that. I will say that so far things have been working well for me. Like I said, if you lose me, it's going to be probably because I kicked the cord out of the hard drive. I've already dropped that hard drive twice. I'm amazed it's still surviving. Speaking of surviving hard drives and recovering from disasters, most of you know that I have had a problem over the last, since about the middle of May, where the drive that I had, the network drive that I had my iTunes library on, went south for the winter and just would not load. Nothing would go on. Nothing would happen. I finally got the drive out of the enclosure a couple of days ago, plugged it in. Disk Utility recognized that a drive was there, but it offered to initialize it. It wasn't recognizing it as a valid drive, validly formatted drive. I fed it into my Windows 7 virtual machine that I'm running in Fusion, and that recognized the drive as raw format, basically. And at that point, I'd already recovered most of the material on the drive, with the exception of a couple of video clips and maybe one or two CDs that I hadn't reloaded yet. because I hadn't found the original. But I decided, just for the heck of it, to see what I could do in recovering this drive now that I had it out of the enclosure. So I knew disk utility was not going to be helpful. Data recovery is not disk utility's strong suit, unless it can be fixed by simply repairing directory. Disk utility is not the piece of software that you want to use. I then posted on the forum I asked about, because the Windows partition had recognized it as a drive being there and recognized it as raw. I started to ask about some Windows utilities that might take care of the issue. The closest it came is recognizing it as raw. That was it. Did not really recover much of anything. And just for the heck of it, right about that time, I had bought the current Mac Heist bundle, and I got an email saying that Data Rescue had been unlocked. And I thought, what the heck? They've unlocked it. This is supposed to be a good program. Let's give it a shot and see what I got. My experience with that convinced me that your first line of defense should always be a good backup. Let me tell you why. This is not a review of Data Rescue. That's not what this is about. It's about the whole process in general. I started the drive rescue. I ran the program. It's fairly simple because the drive. Now, this is one advantage Drive Rescue had over some other software that I had tried. Drive Rescue would at least recognize there was a drive there. Disk utility would not really do much of anything. Nothing else that I hit it with recognized it. And so I thought, okay, we're making some headway. Drive Genius had not recognized there was even a drive there. Data Rescue did. When I tried to run the recovery procedure, it would not recognize it as an HFS drive. That didn't surprise me because it was formatted to be used in a network device. I ended up running a deep scan. The deep scan took almost 24 hours to run, and here's what I can tell you. It actually did a remarkably good job. I haven't done a completely thorough test of Data Rescue, but here's what I noticed. It had more. I ran first recovering some video clips because I knew that those were the things that I had not completely recovered yet. There were 2 or 3 video clips that I had not recovered yet. And the videos in my library had been, because I was using iTunes to play back a couple of movies, a couple of movie-length clips that were, an hour, hour and a half, home video and other things. I knew that those might be a little difficult to recover. So I let it run. It took about 24 hours to run. And what I got back was, in some cases, multiple copies of the same movie, which made sense because over time I had, at various times, saved a couple different copies of some clips to my movie. I'd be editing in iTunes and save it there or something like that. But I also noticed that the stuff that was recovered ranged in size from a few hundred K up to multiple gigabytes. And I can tell you, I haven't gone through all of them, but of the ones I have looked at, because it recovered multiple gigabytes of data, what I can tell you is, and let me just pop down to my note real quick and see if I can get you an idea of what it recovered just on the video side. Let's see what I have here for a note. Data Rescue was able to recover off of my thing 52.9 gigabyte. okay, with varying degrees of success. Some of the files were a few hundred K, some of them were a few gigabytes. Now, here's where the problem is, and this is why I haven't done an in-depth review of this process yet. Not everything that was quote-unquote recovered was usable. Even some of the 2 or 3 gigabyte files, QuickTime did not recognize them, MPEG Streamclip did not, or would not play them properly. And of some of the ones that would play, some of them seemed to be 100% fine. 1 or 2 of them seemed to have a little bit of an audio issue in terms of audio being lower than I remember it being. And some of them may or may not play fine when I resave them. They play to a certain point and then kind of come to a stop. And the system can't seem to play them any further, even in things like VLC. So I'm looking to see if I resave those, will it salvage any more? That's not an insult to this program. That's an indication of how difficult recovering some types of files can be. I think I will have had more luck with the audio portion, recovering audio files. So just from looking at file sizes and things of that nature, it looks like I may have more success with audio. But that took a significant amount of time just to run the scan, just to run the deep scan. But this is on a 2 terabyte drive that was almost full by the time I made the mistake that I made. It wasn't full when I started, and I ended up with something that basically ended up with a duplicate of the drive on the same partition and only about 5-6 gigabytes left. So the one thing you want to be sure of, have some kind of backup plan so that you avoid the need to do data recovery in the first place. I've tried a couple other pieces of data recovery software over the years, and sometimes you can get stuff back. Generally speaking, you will get the most back when the system recognizes the damaged drive as being HFS or FAT32, whatever it was. And then, like for example, HFS plus. I took a drive a couple of years ago that I had accidentally formatted, immediately ran Drive Genius over it, and I was able to recover everything. But that drive basically, I had not written anything to it, and it was still being recognized as FAT32. I had essentially just deleted, not FAT32, excuse me, HFS plus, which is native Mac format. I had basically just accidentally deleted some files. That's your best chance of recovery. But when you do something that scrambles the directory really badly, there's less and less likelihood of recovery. So make sure that you have a good backup plan and check those backups periodically. One of the reasons that I was not able to get everything back immediately is that the last time I backed up my iTunes library, the folder syncing software that I used did not fully copy everything properly, in the sense that, yes, the file sizes looked correct, but some of the files did not load. Not quite sure what caused that, was never really able to pin it down. But that gives you an idea of what you're up against, how difficult it can be. You don't want to know what a data recovery situation is going to cost. I haven't even looked into that, even for my iTunes library, because it just wasn't worth it. Most of the stuff in my library, for the most part, is either CDs that I can reload or material that I have downloaded from iTunes and can re-download. Yes, it's time-consuming to re-download it, but that option is there, and that's how I recovered a lot of it. As I say, I did this more as an exercise to see what would happen. And my conclusion is, even though you're dealing with some software that's pretty good, I'd still rather be able to have a backup and recover. It would have been much faster to just copy stuff from a backup than to run recovery software. That's just the nature of how difficult it is to recover things. It's a little bit like finding your car in a parking lot. If somebody came along and removed all of the signs and all of the markings to tell you what stall you had parked in. Imagine a parking lot with thousands of cars in it, and you park your car on one of the levels, and somebody comes in and they remove every indication of where you are in the lot, every parking space number, every level number, everything. And you got to go through and try to find your car when somebody else may have parked another car in the same slot, or parked part of the car in the same slot, backed up all kinds of things. That's essentially what happens when you have to recover data from a hard drive, especially if new material has been written to the drive. That's almost the equivalent of somebody calling a tow truck, hauling away your car, parking somebody else's car in the slot. So you really want to avoid that situation in the first place. And we've got several threads going about backing up. I've written a couple of things for the blog about it. So keep that in mind as you're setting a backup strategy, particularly in the coming weeks when Yosemite goes final. If you want to upgrade, what you're going to want to do is have a backup. Don't get me wrong. I have updated my OS numerous times without having a backup. Usually have not had a significant problem. But that's not necessarily best practice. Just because hundreds of people update without a problem doesn't mean it's a good idea to do that without having a backup, particularly if you have mission-critical data. A couple of other things that come out this week, there have been a couple of analysts already starting to talk about iPhone 6 and some potential sales figures and what that might mean. I haven't even read those. You might have seen in the forum thread about this. I tend to avoid those kinds of projections and prognostications. Let me give you an idea why. I have been following Apple computers since shortly before I bought my first Apple II. I bought an Apple IIG. I was using an Apple II in high school. I bought my first Apple II GS. That was my first computer in, I want to say, probably 1988. And I've been following Apple computer ever since then. At various times over the years, different people have made prognostications about Apple's future, what they should do, what they shouldn't do. There was a period of time where Apple was on the verge of going under, about as close as you can come without actually doing it. And you would see all kinds of projections about how many Macs Apple was going to sell and how many they weren't going to sell. None of the projections were right. And periodically you see people saying, hey, if Apple doesn't do thing X, they're going to be out of business in 90 days or out of business in a year. That was 4 or 5 years ago. Every so often the rumor pops up, based in part on comments from some analysts, that Apple is going to build a TV set. And I don't mean the Apple TV device that we have now. I mean that Apple is going to partner with somebody and build a TV set. Apple software basically running a smart set with the screen, the monitor portion, built by some third party. Samsung, I believe, is one of the ones that has been mentioned. If they ever build that, I don't think they're going to be partnered with Samsung when they do it. That's just my opinion. But every so often, you know, a new iPhone comes out and somebody will say, oh, this is the... If this phone does not include X, then Apple is done. It's not going to sell. The iPhone is not going to sell. If this phone doesn't include this feature, you know, if you listen to some of these analysts, it's almost like they expect the next incoming phone, whether it's the 4, the 5, or the 6, to have a battery that's the equivalent of a nuclear reactor that you never have to charge, and have a screen size the size of the aircraft deck of the USS Ronald Reagan. It's just not, the predictions will be all over the place. If Apple sells a lot of phones but doesn't sell as many as the analysts predicted, that's bad. If Apple sells more phones than they expected and have trouble keeping up with the initial demand, which has happened before, then somebody will say, oh, well, that's bad planning on their part. They didn't know exactly how many to sell, and people are going to have to wait. You know, all kinds of things. If it doesn't have this feature, then it's no good. If it doesn't have this feature, it's no good. I've stopped paying attention to those because, really, the success or failure of any new device that Apple builds is going to be dependent in large part on how well did they tap into not just what the consumer knows they want, but what the consumer wants but maybe didn't realize. And here's what I mean. I've read some things over the years that say, for example, like Sony with the Walkman. You know, or the VCR, for example. When the VCR came out initially, almost nobody, you know, most consumers, if you said, do you need a VCR? They would have said no. You had to get them to the point where they wanted a VCR. In other words, they had to see that they could record their favorite TV show, their favorite soap opera, and watch it at 10 o'clock at night instead of 10 o'clock in the morning. Until that developed, okay? And some of the support technology, like blank videotape develops, you don't see a demand for a particular piece of equipment. The early days of the automobile are very similar. The automobile didn't take off until you start seeing, you know, one of the things that had to be present to help the automobile take off was having service stations and a road system that didn't bounce your guts out as you're driving across country. Both of those things were an integral part in helping the automobile become a big deal. Those three things kind of develop in parallel. One of the things that helped the iPhone take off as much as it did is that by the time Apple released the hardware to the public, developers had already, the day the iTunes Music Store opened with applications in it, there were already hundreds, if not thousands, of applications developed and in place. So that when somebody went down to their local Apple store or wherever and bought an iPhone, they had applications right then that they could play with. That's one of the things that has always been true. A certain amount of that has to be present. It's part of the reason that the developer versions of applications like Yosemite and like iOS 8 are released to the developer community before it's released to the general public. That accomplishes two purposes, both of which are beneficial for Apple. One is that it gets the software tested on multiple configurations. And two, from a usability standpoint, it means that the day the new OS comes and hits the public, that the developers have had time to make sure that their applications have been updated, or that they will be able to say to their customers, look, my app is already Yosemite clean, or we have an update coming, the update will be available in a couple of weeks, whatever it is. Many applications may not require a change. How much of the change is required depends on what goes on under the hood. For example, when we made the shift from OS 9 to OS 10, obviously there were a lot of people that needed to be, there were a lot of applications that needed to be updated. So you had to have it in the hands of developers to get them to get their software ready. All of those things are part of being a Mac user now, waiting and saying, okay, I'm going to wait a little while. For me, I kind of like being out on the cutting edge and testing this. It's worked well so far. I've enjoyed it. And I want to, before I close tonight, leave with a tip, speaking of updating software. And I'll put the link to this tip in the software, in the show notes. This will be helpful to some of you who have updated to the newest edition of iWork. One of the things that happens as you move from one version of the software to another, sometimes a feature that you need will get dropped or will be significantly changed, and you would prefer to have the older version, to use the older version. I was trolling over on what's now hints.macworld.com. Used to be Mac OS X Hints. And they have one on there, user submitted, about making iWork 09 the default and avoiding the upgrade nag. And so here's what this hint deals with. If you updated iWork beyond the iWork 09 version, you may discover when you launched it that there were some things that you would prefer to do in iWork 09, that you really would prefer to do that. But now that's not showing up as a really good option because the newer version is up there and it wants to open everything in the newest version. Well, here's a couple things that you need to know. Even if your older version is still on the hard drive, you can't do the get info and then change all and set it to iWorks 09. That doesn't work. Okay, so here's what this particular user did. First of all, I made a backup before of iWorks 09. Okay, he then installed the latest iWorks update. Okay, when you do that, the older version gets moved into a subfolder called iWorks 09. Okay, and that's your backup. Afterwards, what he did was have those applications on 2 different volumes. Okay, so put the iWork 09 one on the same volume with your system software, and it will take precedence. The other one can be updated off of the other drive. Some applications do not play nice when they've been moved around like that, but this will work for some. There's a lot of different things there that you can that you may be able to do that with. Maybe I didn't do a great job explaining that yet, but that'll give you an idea of what it involves. I've kept older versions of certain applications around, sometimes for one reason or another. To be honest with you, to this day, I still prefer iMovie HD, the last one before this new series of interfaces. The last couple of versions have been pretty good. The new one still drives me nuts. I'm still getting used to it. But to me, as far as ease of use, iMovie HD was the last one that I really found, quote-unquote, easy to use because it retained a lot of the simplicity of an old-style tape editor. Some of the ones that are a little bit newer have, I've liked some of them. The '09 version of iMovie was okay. And the 2011, that was part of iWorks 11. Oh, once again, okay, I used it. I finally got comfortable with it. I did the upgrade to the newest one relatively recently because I don't use iMovie that often. I'm still getting a handle on it. Same thing with the new version of GarageBand. Those are two applications that I don't use a lot, so it's taken some getting used to. So when you go to upgrade, especially if you're upgrading your OS, let somebody else be the guinea pig. Find out if software that you need is going to work before you do this, before you do an upgrade, especially if you're going to be testing a beta. If you've got something critical to you, make sure you've got some kind of an escape plan. With 10.7, 10.8, and 10.9, the easiest way to go backwards. Let's say you updated, you didn't like the update, you want to go backwards. The easiest way, by far, to go backwards and revert your system to the OS that you prefer would be to create a clone before you do the update. If you even remotely think that you are going to want to go back to the old operating system, have yourself a clone. Carbon Copy Cloner is widely recommended on the forum. Some of our users also use SuperDuper. Keep in mind that SuperDuper does not clone the recovery partition. And don't hold your breath waiting for ShirtPocket software to make a version that clones the recovery partition. This is not an insult to them. I've said it once here on the show. I'll say it again. I think that their opinion has to be that if you clone the main boot partition, there's very little need to clone the recovery partition because you can always recover things by reloading from your bootable clone. I think that's their approach. Let's face it, the recovery partition concept has been around since 10.7 was released. Carbon Copy Cloner clones the recovery partition, so obviously it can be done. I think that in all probability, the guys at ShirtPocket and SuperDuper, and I like their software, I've used it before, have made a conscious decision that this feature, adding this feature, is not necessary. I'll leave that up to you. Some people agree with them, some people don't. I'll leave that up to you. Whatever you use, I think there has to be two criteria. It has to get you back up and running quickly, and it has to be something that you understand how to use. There is no point in creating a piece of cloning software if it's so complicated that people won't use it. Fortunately, both Carbon Copy Cloner and the other from ShirtPocket, both of these, both SuperDuper and Carbon Copy Cloner, are easy to use. So get yourself something, get yourself set up. Do not, by any means, whether you're talking about a clone or a time machine backup, do not put that on the same drive as your data. If you've got your backup, and I mentioned this last week, and I'll keep saying it until it catches hold, if you have your data, your primary data, and your backup on the same drive, you do not have a good backup strategy. And the reason you do not have a good backup strategy is that if your hard drive were to fail completely, okay, your data is gone. If your hard drive does like my Mac media drive did, both partitions shot, okay, scrambled so badly that data recovery software had a hard time dealing with it, your backup is shot. And let me put it this way. Yes, it may take several hours to completely reload your system from a bootable clone. But it doesn't take 24 hours. I know, because I've done it. And if all you wanted to do was get back up and running, you can do that in a matter of minutes. A couple of years ago, I had a Mac desktop, a Mac Pro, and the hard drive crashed in it. I had a clone that was just a couple of days old. I was literally able to get, I tried to reboot a couple of times for troubleshooting purposes to see that didn't do any good. So I decided to boost my clone. Literally in a matter of minutes, in other words, basically the amount of time that it took to boot, I could boot from the clone. I ran like that for 2 days until I had an opportunity to call Apple and check. I still had Apple Care at the time. They agreed that the hard drive was at fault. I'm a couple hundred miles from the nearest Apple store, so they cross-shipped me a replacement drive. I had the drive in a couple of days, and a couple hours later, I had all my data back on the drive. Now, had I tried to recover from the dead drive, like I said, you're looking at, when I tried this last recovery, it was 24 hours. And it got some of it back, but it doesn't look like it's going to get all of it. So I wouldn't rely on recovery procedures. Make sure you got a good backup. You just don't want to be caught dead without one. You're dead in the water without it. Whatever that procedure is. I think it should include something the equivalent of an off-site backup or something of that nature. So keep that in mind as you go through the coming weeks, and I'll have more for you next week. I hope you've enjoyed this show, and we'll be back next week. It'll be early August. Can you believe it? It's August already. The summer has come and gone. I hope you've enjoyed the show. We'll see you again next week, and until then, I'm your host, Sly Dude, and this has been the Mac Forum Sunday Video Chat.